Frank, let's zero back in on the trade conversation. You have a fresh trade targets list up now at dailyfaceoff.com. We'll talk about some of the new names in a second, but a couple of the names who've moved up your board. Scott Laughton is now at number 2. He's been a guy who's been around the trade conversation a lot over the last, call it 18 months, if you want to. Putting him up at 2, is that a signal that the Flyers are 100% committed to moving this guy, or is it not quite that sure?
Yeah, I think they're pretty committed. And you heard John Tortorella hint at it this week when he said, we've got to get better. Well, how do the Philadelphia Flyers find a way to get better for the future? Is by moving on from someone like Scott Laughton and getting something in return that they can either use or package. And I think at the same time, the longer this has gone on with Scott Laughton and the Flyers, and the fact that the Flyers are not really in a competitive posture, I think in some ways, even Scott Laughton might be ready to move on. So he moves up the board. He doesn't obviously have any say, no trade protection. And the 1 year remaining on his deal, I think makes him an attractive alternative to some teams that are in the center market. Not going to cost you an arm and a leg in terms of acquisition, most likely. Not going to cost you an arm and a leg on your cap. And you can get some nice center depth. Jake Evans rockets up the board. He was in the teens last time around. He's up to 4. They're not coming to terms on a new deal. I think it's very unlikely that the Montreal Canadiens hang on to him on the other end of this. Do they have to trade him? No, they've got a whole ton of draft picks. You got to give something good. But I think they had a mid-second round pick on the table for him last time around in the summer. So can they match that? Can they get somewhere in the second round for Jake Evans? I think the answer is yes, based on the way that the center market has unfolded. And after that, we've got some other interesting names: Carson Soucy, Kyle Palmieri, Brandon Tanev, very likely to move. Same thing with Yanni Gourde. We get a lot of wild cards after that. And it became harder to kind of sift out this list. Brock Boeser, I believe the Vancouver Canucks have put a 5-year, $40 million deal on the table. That's 5 years times $8 million. He wants 6 or 7 years. Will they blink over the next week, or will they trade him?
And the thing too, like obviously if you're acquiring him with the thought of he's just a pure rental, we want help for this playoff run, then you don't really care. But if you're a team who is maybe looking at Brock Boeser going, hey, could we bring him in and sign him? Does hearing that it was in a 5x8 offer that he turned down and wants more term, presumably, or then more dollars, like, do you sit there as an acquiring team? Does that change your opinion of him at all?
I don't think so. I think look, he was already making $665. That was before he had a 40-goal season and then a 28-goal season he's on pace for this year, despite missing 7 games. If he was paid $665 and his career average was like 26 goals before, $665 to $8 isn't really a big reach. And he's not an old UFA. He's one of the younger UFAs that's coming to market. So I wouldn't be concerned about the term, and I think he's going to get it, whether it's in Vancouver or somewhere else, which has allowed him to remain as patient as possible in Vancouver, going, hey, I'm good. I'd like to be a Canuck. A little bit disappointed, I'm paraphrasing, with the loyalty that I've shown that we haven't gotten something done sooner. But if it doesn't work out here, in parentheses, this has kind of been a mess this season, I can go somewhere else and get a very similar type deal if you guys don't want to pay me.
And again, I feel like I think this way. I'm sure a lot of other people do. I got to get rid of the flat cap part of my brain here, right? And it's like, okay, Brock Boeser right now is worth $8 million. If you're sitting there going, well, how's it going to age? Okay, by year 6 and 7, what are we looking at for the salary cap? $8 million might be what a second line is
going to be $130 million by then. Plus.
Yeah. And same thing with young players. You talk about extensions and it's like, oh, that's a lot to give them right now. And it's like, no, now is the time to bite the bullet and give a guy a bit too high of an AAV because you want to reap the benefits in a few years. Speaking of young names, Frank, that's kind of where I want to go on the fresh side of the trade targets list. A handful of really interesting players. The one that really stood out to me is JJ Peterka, though, in Buffalo. 17 goals in 55 games this year. Frank, he was almost a 30-goal guy last year. Why does Buffalo want to get rid of him?
Well, they don't, is the answer. I don't envy Kevin Adams at all. Think about the names that we've discussed so far this year. Dylan Cousins, Alex Tuck. Go through their list. Bowen Byram in our top 10. This has been a real tough year for the Sabres. But then you've got JJ Peterka. And he is a bona fide first-line player. He's 23 years old, and he's someone that I think is just beginning to scratch the surface. That said, he's due a big new contract, and I'd be real curious to take the temperature of all the players in Buffalo, not just Peterka. How intrigued, how interested are you in staying with the last place team in the East? So, okay, you say, well, that's great, but he doesn't really have a choice. He's an RFA, not a UFA. And you're correct, except we talked that this is going to be the summer of offer sheets, right? So he doesn't sign, ends up being an offer sheet target, and all of a sudden, RFAs have a whole new lever to pull in their arsenal that really not many pulled before. It's not a new one, but it's fresh because we've seen two players transact very recently. And I think that has to be a huge fear for the Buffalo Sabres. So I'm told, and sources indicate, that a number of teams have been calling the Buffalo Sabres and asking about JT Peterka. The Sabres have said, we're not interested in trading him. However, I think that conversation is going to evolve, which is why he's on my trade targets board.
Lucas Reichel was a guy who I read his name and was like, whoa, why are they open to trading him? He was a first-round pick not that long ago. And then I looked and I was like, oh, first-round pick in 2020. That was 5 years ago, as crazy enough as that sounds.
Different
so that
regime,
one, yeah, that one makes a bit of sense. The other name, Mario Ferraro, 26 years old, cost controlled at $3.25 million this year and next, and a guy who excels in his own end. It's like, yeah, I could see a lot of contending teams going, ooh, I will give up a lot more for that guy than I would for name the rental D-man on the market.
Yeah, and you mentioned cost control. That's maybe the most interesting part is the Sabres don't have any salary retained transaction slots left. So if they're going to move Mario Ferraro, and I think that teams have been calling and asking, and I think the Sabres the Sharks are ready and willing to deal. They're ready to make things happen. That getting him at $3.25 million, like, it's not an absurd number. And teams view him as a great sort of 4 or 5 pivot, can comfortably play on your second pair, can comfortably defend on your third pair as well. And he's super well liked, brings a ton of energy. I think there's a lot of reasons why a team would consider going after someone like Ferraro. And we had Jesse Montano on. That's what really got the wheels spinning yesterday. He talked about the connection from UMass between Cale Makar and Ferraro. I just mentioned how much I'm not a believer in Colorado's second and third pairs. Well, maybe this is one of those guys that is a true great fit, and a tip of the cap to Jesse as well.
Monday, we're going to do some more mock trades from everybody. So look for that call out on Twitter if you want to send Frank some mock trades to break down. And again, it's all deadline talk next week because we're only 7 days away. Frank, percent chance we see a trade of some amount of significance over the weekend?
70%.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.